The August heat pressed down on Chicago's South Side like a heavy, wet wool blanket, making the air shimmer above the cracked pavement of 63rd Street. Malik Johnson, just 8 years old, wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand, his worn sneakers scuffing softly against the concrete as he walked. He was supposed to be saving his energy, just like his mother, Nia, was saving every penny she could scrape together, but the library was the only place with air conditioning, and the walk home always reminded him of how unforgiving the summer could be. The noise of the city was loud here, sirens in the distance, the rhythmic thrum of bass from a passing car, and the constant low roar of the unseen crowd. But Malik was in his own world, his mind occupied by the science book tucked safely in his backpack. He reached the bus stop near the corner, intending to rest his legs for a moment on the metal bench. That was when he saw it. Half hidden beneath the seat, sitting amidst gum wrappers and dust, lay a brown leather wallet. It looked out of place here, too sleek, too new, like a visitor from a different planet. Malik froze, glancing around to see if anyone was watching. Mrs. Gable was dozing on her porch across the street, her fan idle in her lap, and the street was momentarily empty. His heart doing a nervous little dance in his chest, Malik knelt and picked it up. The leather felt smooth and expensive under his small, callous fingers. Curiosity, a force stronger than fear, made him open it. His breath hitched in his throat. Inside, neatly tucked against the dark leather, was a thick stack of cash. $100 bills. Crisp, clean, and smelling of ink and possibility. He counted them quickly, his hands trembling. 1, 2, 10. $1,000. Malik stared at the money, and for a terrifying second, the world seemed to tilt. $1,000 was a fortune. It was more than a fortune. It was a lifeline. Immediately, an image flashed in his mind, the bright pink eviction notice he had seen taped to their apartment door that morning. He remembered the sound of his mother crying softly in the bathroom before she put on her diner uniform and her brave face. This money could fix that. It could peel that pink paper off the door. It could buy groceries that weren't just ramen noodles. It could make his mother smile again, a real smile, not the tired one she wore for him. All he had to do was close the wallet, slip it into his backpack, and walk home. No one had seen him. No one would ever know. It would be so easy. But then, another sound cut through the noise of his temptation. It was his mother's voice, clear and firm in his memory from the night he had asked why they couldn't just sneak into the movies like the other kids. "Malik," she had said, crouching down to look him in the eye, "we may not have money, but we have our integrity. Integrity is doing the right thing even when no one is watching. Once you lose that, you lose yourself." Malik looked down at the ID card tucked in the wallet's window. Harrison Vance, it read, with an address in the Loop, downtown. The face on the card was an older white man, looking stern and distant. Malik bit his lip. The heat seemed to intensify, beads of sweat trickling down his neck. He looked toward his apartment building, then down at the wallet, and finally toward the stairs leading up to the train station. He closed the wallet with a soft snap. The sound felt final. He couldn't go home. Not with this. If he went home, he might be tempted to keep it, or worse, his mother might be tempted, and he couldn't bear to see her struggle with that choice. He squeezed the wallet tight, feeling the sharp edges of the ID card against his palm. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out his crumpled lunch money, just enough for a fare. He turned his back on the way home and began to climb the stairs to the train platform, leaving the safety of his neighborhood to enter a world that wasn't built for boys like him. The train ride took 45 minutes, and with each stop closer to the city center, the passengers changed. The tired faces and work uniforms of his neighborhood were replaced by press suits, shiny briefcases, and people who looked at their phones instead of each other. When Malik stepped off the L train in the Loop, the world seemed to stretch upwards, dizzying and metallic. The Vance Tower rose before him like a mountain made of glass and steel, reflecting the harsh sunlight in a way that made Malik squint. He stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, clutching his backpack straps, so tight his knuckles turned ashy. He felt invisible here, just a small speck of dust in a place designed for giants, but he remembered his mother's voice telling him to walk with his head high. He took a deep breath of the city air, which smelled of exhaust and expensive coffee, and pushed through the heavy revolving doors. The first thing that hit him was the cold. The air conditioning in the lobby was so powerful it felt like walking into a freezer, instantly chilling the sweat on his back. The second thing was the silence. The lobby was vast, with floors of white marble, so polished Malik could see his own reflection looking back at him, small and out of place. A crystal chandelier hung from the ceiling like a frozen explosion of light. He took a hesitant step, his sneakers squeaking sharply on the pristine floor. That sound was like a signal. Behind a sleek, high desk that looked more like a fortress, a security guard looked up. He was a large man, his uniform straining at the shoulders, and his eyes narrowed the moment they landed on Malik. Malik tried to walk toward the reception desk, practicing the polite greeting he had rehearsed on the train, but the guard was already moving. He came around the desk with heavy, purposeful strides, his hand raised in a stop motion. "Hey you. Hold it right there, kid," the guard boomed, his voice echoing off the cold walls. He didn't look at Malik's face. He looked at his clothes, his hair, his worn backpack. "You're in the wrong place. We don't allow soliciting here, and we definitely don't have public restrooms. You need to turn around and go back outside." "I'm not here to use the bathroom," Malik said, his voice coming out smaller than he wanted. He tried to stand taller. "I need to see Mr. Harrison Vance. I have something of his." The guard let out a short, dismissive laugh. "Yeah, and I'm the president. Look, son, Mr. Vance is the CEO of this company. He doesn't have time for whatever this is. Selling candy? Asking for donations? We've got strict policies." He took a step closer, looming over Malik, his hand reaching out to grab the boy's shoulder to steer him toward the door. "Now beat it before I call the cops." Fear spiked in Malik's chest, the real, primal fear of a boy who knew that calls to the police rarely ended well for people who looked like him. He stepped back, clutching his backpack to his chest defensively. "I'm not leaving," Malik shouted, the desperation making his voice crack. "I found his wallet. I'm trying to give it back." Just then, a soft chime signaled the arrival of an elevator. The silver doors slid open, and a group of people in dark suits stepped out. In the center was a man with silver hair and a weary, lined face that Malik recognized immediately from the ID card. Harrison Vance. He looked tired, rubbing his temples as he listened to a younger man talking rapidly about quarterly projections. The commotion near the door made him look up. He frowned, seeing the large guard towering over the small boy. "What is going on here?" Harrison's voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the lobby noise instantly. The guard stiffened and stepped back, his demeanor changing from aggressive to deferential in a split second. "Apologies, Mr. Vance," the guard said, smoothing his uniform. "Just handling a disturbance. This kid wandered in off the street, making up stories. I was just escorting him out." Harrison looked at the guard, then down at Malik. He didn't see a disturbance. He saw a terrified 8-year-old boy in a faded NASA t-shirt, trembling but holding his ground. He saw the way the boy's eyes were wide with panic, but also with a fierce kind of determination. Harrison waved the guard away and walked slowly toward Malik. The fatigue in his eyes was replaced by a flicker of curiosity. "You wanted to see me, young man?" he asked gently, kneeling down on one knee, a movement that made his expensive suit fabric stretch so he was eye level with Malik. Malik swallowed hard, his heart hammering against his ribs. He didn't trust his voice. Instead, he unzipped his backpack. The guard took a tense step forward, as if expecting a weapon, but Harrison held up a hand to stop him. Malik reached inside and pulled out the brown leather wallet. He held it out with both hands, like an offering. "You dropped this," Malik whispered, "at the bus stop on 63rd. I saw your picture inside." Harrison stared at the wallet. He patted his jacket pocket, realizing for the first time it was gone. He took it from Malik's hands slowly, his fingers brushing against the boy's. He opened it, expecting what? To find it empty? To find the cards gone? He thumbed through the bills. $1,000. Every single bill was there. He looked up from the cash, his blue eyes meeting Malik's dark ones, searching for an answer to a question he hadn't even asked yet. The cynicism that had built up in him over 65 years cracked, just a little. "It's all here," Harrison said, his voice rough with emotion. He looked at Malik with a mixture of confusion and awe. You traveled all the way downtown to bring this to me? Son, you must have known there was a lot of money in here. Why on earth didn't you take it? The sleek black sedan moved through the streets of the South Side like a shark swimming in a shallow pond. Inside, the leather seats were soft and the engine was so quiet it felt like they were gliding, but outside the tinted windows, the reality of Malik's world rolled by. Harrison Vance gripped the steering wheel, his eyes scanning the rows of small, tired houses and the chain-link fences that leaned wearily toward the sidewalk. He hadn't been to this part of Chicago in decades, not since the city had broken ground on a community center he'd funded but never visited. Beside him, Malik sat in the passenger seat, looking small but proud, pointing out turns with a seriousness that made Harrison smile. "It's the yellow brick building on the left," Malik said. "The one with the flower pots on the porch." When they pulled up to the curb, the contrast was sharp. The car looked like it had landed from outer space next to the dented sedan parked in the driveway. Harrison turned off the engine, and for a moment, the silence between the 65-year-old billionaire and the 8-year-old boy was comfortable. "Your mother," Harrison said quietly, looking at the well-tended petunias fighting to survive the heat on the porch. "She must be a special woman to raise a son who would walk past $1,000 to do the right thing." Malik just nodded, unbuckling his seatbelt. "She's the best," he said simply. But as they approached the front door, the sound of weeping drifted through the screen. It was a low, jagged sound, the kind of crying people do when they think no one can hear them. Malik's face fell. He pushed the door open without knocking. "Mama," he called out, panic rising in his voice. Harrison followed him inside, removing his hat out of habit. The apartment was tiny, stiflingly hot without air conditioning, but spotless. The worn linoleum floor shone, and books were stacked neatly on a corner table. Sitting at the small kitchen table, her head buried in her arms, was a woman in a diner waitress uniform. Next to her elbow lay a crumpled pink paper, the eviction notice. Nia Johnson jerked her head up at the sound of Malik's voice. Her face was streaked with tears, her eyes wide with fear as she saw her son standing next to a tall, imposing white man in an expensive suit. She stood up immediately, wiping her face with the back of her hand, her protective instincts flaring. "Malik? Where were you? Who is this?" She looked from Malik to Harrison, her body tense, ready to defend her child against whatever trouble he might have brought home. "Mrs. Johnson." Harrison stepped forward, raising his hands peacefully. "Please don't be alarmed. My name is Harrison Vance. Your son, he did something extraordinary today." Malik rushed to his mother, pulling the empty wallet from his pocket. Harrison had insisted he carry it in and explained everything. He spoke fast, words tumbling over each other about the bus stop, the money, the train ride, and the security guard. As he spoke, the fear in Nia's eyes slowly turned to shock, and then to a fierce, glowing pride. She dropped to her knees and hugged Malik so hard he squeaked. "You gave it back," she whispered into his hair. "You gave it back." She looked up at Harrison, tears fresh in her eyes, but these were different. "I'm sorry, sir. I taught him that we don't take what isn't ours. I didn't know if he understood how hard that choice would be." "He understood," Harrison said gently. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a $100 bill. "I wanted to give him a reward. He earned it." Malik took the bill, looking at his mother for permission. Nia nodded slowly, grateful but clearly embarrassed that a stranger was witnessing their desperation. Harrison glanced at the pink notice on the table. "If I may ask, is everything all right?" Nia sighed, the fight draining out of her. "The diner I work at, they closed down today. Without notice." She gestured helplessly around the clean but impoverished room. "I have rent due, and now no job. I was sitting here trying to figure out how to tell Malik we might have to move to a shelter." She straightened her spine, a flicker of defiance returning. "But we'll figure it out. I have an associate's degree in business administration. I'm good with numbers. I need to find someone who will look past the address on my resume." Harrison really looked at her. He saw the neatness of the apartment, the intelligence in her eyes, and the integrity she had instilled in her son. He realized that giving her money would be a temporary fix, a band-aid on a broken leg. She didn't need charity. She needed a door to open. "You studied business?" Harrison asked, his mind racing. My company, Vance Energy, is looking for an assistant building manager. It requires organization, honesty, and a head for numbers. It's not a waitress job. It's a career. Nia stared at him, stunned silence filling the room. Are you serious? I don't make jokes about business, Harrison said, pulling a sleek business card from his pocket, the same one Malik had seen in the wallet. He handed it to her. Come to my office tomorrow at 9 a.m. Ask for me. Bring your resume. I can't promise you the job, you'll have to interview for it, but I can promise you a fair chance. Nia took the card, her fingers trembling as they brushed the embossed lettering. It felt heavier than paper. It felt like hope. She looked at Harrison, then down at Malik, who was grinning toothily. Thank you, she whispered, her voice choking. I'll be there. I won't let you down. I have a feeling you won't, Harrison said. He turned to leave, pausing at the door to look back at the mother and son standing in the golden afternoon light of their humble kitchen. For the first time in years, the crushing loneliness he felt in his own empty mansion seemed to lift, replaced by a warm feeling he recognized as purpose. 6 months later, the suffocating heat of August was a distant memory, replaced by the biting wind off Lake Michigan that Chicagoans called the Hawk. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Vance Energy boardroom, snow swirled in chaotic patterns against a gray sky, but inside, the atmosphere was warm and triumphant. Nia Johnson stood at the head of the polished mahogany table, clicking through the final slide of her presentation. She looked different now. The diner uniform was gone, replaced by a tailored navy blazer and slacks that she had bought carefully from a thrift store and altered herself. Her voice, once tentative, was steady and commanding as she pointed to the graph on the screen. By renegotiating the waste management contracts and optimizing the HVAC schedules, she said, we've reduced building operating costs by 15% this quarter alone. Harrison Vance, sitting at the opposite end of the table, beamed like a proud father. Excellent work, Nia, he said, and heads around the table nodded in agreement. Everyone, that is, except Derek Thorne. The vice president of operations sat silently, spinning a silver pen between his fingers. Derek was 40, with the kind of sharp, handsome features that usually signaled success, but lately, his face had hardened into a mask of thinly veiled resentment. He had spent 12 years climbing the corporate ladder, sacrificing his marriage and his weekends, only to watch this waitress from the South Side waltz in and become the CEO's favorite in less than a year. It gnawed at him like an ulcer. After the meeting, Derek cornered Nia near the coffee machine in the break room. Impressive show in there, he said, his smile not reaching his eyes. You really have a knack for pinching pennies. I suppose that's a survival skill where you come from. It was a microaggression, sharp and precise, designed to remind her that she didn't belong. Nia didn't flinch. She poured her coffee calmly. Efficiency is a skill everywhere, Derek. Even here. She walked away, her head high, but Derek's eyes followed her, cold and calculating. He waited until 6 p.m., when he saw Nia hurry to the elevator, putting on her coat to catch the train to pick up Malik from his after-school program. The office slowly emptied out until only the cleaning crew remained. Derek sat at his desk, the blue light of his computer screen illuminating his pale face. He had administrative privileges, access to everything. He opened the shared financial database and navigated to Nia's department folder. It was easy. Too easy. He found the quarterly maintenance logs Nia had just submitted. With a few keystrokes, he altered the vendor payouts. He shifted numbers from the completed projects column to miscellaneous expenses, inflating the total by $50,000. It didn't look like savings anymore. It looked like embezzlement. It looked like the kind of sloppy, greedy mistake a desperate person would make. Let's see you survive this, he muttered, saving the file and closing the window. He walked out of the building, feeling a dark satisfaction settle in his chest. The next morning, the storm broke. Nia was settling at her desk when an urgent email popped up from Finance, CSING Harrison Vance, and HR. Subject: Urgent discrepancies in Q4 report. Nia frowned, clicking it open. As she read the accusations of inflated costs and missing funds, her stomach dropped. She pulled up her files, but the numbers on the screen were wrong. They were all wrong. Panic flared hot and fast. She was going to lose everything. The job, the apartment, the future she promised Malik. But as she stared at the screen, her panic shifted into something colder, sharper. She remembered the late nights she spent studying IT systems online. She remembered the specific timestamp of when she had last saved her work. She didn't cry. Instead, she opened the system's activity log. Someone had been in her files after she left. Nia's fingers flew across the keyboard. She wasn't a victim anymore. She was a mother protecting her cub, and she was going to find the wolf. The silence in the CEO's office on the 45th floor of Vance Tower was so absolute that Nia could hear the wind howling against the reinforced glass windows, a mournful sound that seemed to echo the tension in the room. Outside, Lake Michigan was a vast sheet of jagged gray ice, but inside, the atmosphere was suffocatingly hot. Harrison Vance sat behind his massive oak desk, his face pale and unreadable, staring at the financial report Nia had placed in front of him. Standing by the window, Derek Thorne looked out at the frozen city, his posture rigid, radiating a mix of arrogance and defensive anger. Nia stood alone in the center of the room, clutching a manila folder to her chest like a shield. She felt small, but her feet were planted firmly on the plush carpet. She wasn't just fighting for a job anymore. She was fighting for her name, for the lesson of integrity she had taught Malik, and for every time the world had told her she wasn't enough. "The numbers don't lie, Nia," Derek said, finally turning around. His voice was smooth, laced with a faux sympathy that made Nia's skin crawl. "I warned Harrison that you might be overwhelmed by the responsibilities of this promotion. It's understandable. Desperate people do desperate things. Maybe you needed the money for your son? No one would blame you for trying to survive, but we can't have thieves in management." Harrison looked up, his eyes heavy with disappointment. "Nia," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "Is this true? Did you authorize these transfers?" "No, sir," Nia said clearly. She walked forward and placed a second folder on the desk, right on top of the damning report. "Derek is right about one thing. Numbers don't lie, but people do." She opened the folder, revealing rows of highlighted data logs. "I knew something was wrong the moment I saw the email. So I did what I always do when I don't understand a problem. I researched it. I pulled the server access logs for the finance drive." Derek scoffed, stepping away from the window. "This is ridiculous. She's trying to confuse you with technical jargon, Harrison. She barely knows how to use Excel." "I know enough," Nia cut in, her voice sharpening. She pointed to a highlighted line on the page. "These edits, the ones moving the funds to the miscellaneous account, were made at 7:42 p.m. last night. The building security logs show that I swiped my badge at the ground floor turnstile at 6:15 p.m. to catch the train home. I wasn't even in the building, Mr. Vance." She turned to look directly at Derek. "But you were. Your ID badge accessed the executive elevator at 7:30 p.m. And the IP address that made these changes? It corresponds to the workstation in the VP's office." "Your office, Derek." The room went deadly still. Harrison picked up the log, his eyes scanning the data Nia had meticulously compiled. The evidence was irrefutable. It was a digital fingerprint that Derek, in his arrogance, hadn't bothered to wipe clean. Harrison slowly lowered the paper. When he looked at Derek, the disappointment in his eyes had been replaced by a cold, hard shock. "Derek," Harrison said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Is this true? Did you sabotage her?" Derek's face flushed a deep, ugly red. He opened his mouth to deny it, to spin another lie, but the weight of the truth in Harrison's gaze crushed the words in his throat. The facade of the polished executive cracked, and something raw and ugly spilled out. "Sabotage." Derek spat the word out like poison. "I was protecting this company. I was correcting a mistake. You bring this nobody in from the streets, and suddenly she's a director? Suddenly she's sitting in meetings where I spent 12 years earning my chair. It's not about her background." Harrison stood up, his voice rising. "It's about merit. She earned it. Why would you do something so vicious?" "Because you don't care," Derek shouted, the sound shocking in the quiet office. "You talk about merit, about family, but it's all a lie. You use people until they break, and then you replace them." He was trembling now, years of festering resentment pouring out. 10 years ago, when my mother was dying of cancer, when I was drowning in medical bills, begging for a loan, for help. HR sent me a form letter. A form letter, Harrison. Policy does not allow for personal loans. My mother died in a county hospital because I couldn't afford the specialist at Northwestern. She died because you and your precious policies didn't give a damn about me. Nia watched him, her anger softening into something else. She recognized that look in his eyes. It was the look of a wounded animal lashing out. She knew what it was to lose family to poverty. Harrison stared at Derek, his expression shifting from anger to confusion, and then to a profound sorrow. He walked around his desk, not towards Derek, but towards a locked filing cabinet in the corner. His hands shook slightly as he keyed in a code and pulled open the heavy drawer. He rummaged through old files until he found a thin, yellowed envelope. He walked back and placed it gently on the desk in front of Derek. Rebecca Blake, Harrison said softly. That was her name, wasn't it? Derek froze, tears of rage streaming down his face. Don't you say her name. Open it, Harrison said. Derek hesitated, then snatched the envelope. He pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a letter from Northwestern Memorial Hospital, dated 10 years ago. It acknowledged a receipt of payment. $30,000. Paid in full for the palliative care of Rebecca Blake. Donor anonymous. Derek stared at the paper, his world tilting on its axis. I don't understand. The hospital said a charity paid it. An anonymous donor. I was the donor, Derek, Harrison said, his voice heavy with grief. When HR denied your request, they brought it to me. I knew the policy couldn't be broken publicly without setting a precedent, so I paid it from my personal account. I made it anonymous because I didn't want you to feel indebted to me. I didn't want to buy your loyalty. I just wanted to help your mother. He looked at the younger man with pity. I thought I was doing the right thing. I didn't know you spent the last decade hating me for it. The paper fluttered from Derek's fingers to the floor. He looked at Harrison, then at Nia, and finally covered his face with his hands. A sob tore through him, a harsh, guttural sound of a man realizing he had become the villain in his own story. He sank into one of the guest chairs, utterly defeated. I didn't know, he whispered. Oh God, I didn't know. Harrison stood over him, looking tired and old. You almost destroyed an innocent woman's life because of a misunderstanding you refused to question. You committed fraud, Derek. I have no choice. You're fired. I want you to clear out your desk immediately. Derek nodded numbly, accepting his fate. He started to stand up, his movement slow and broken. Wait. The voice came from the center of the room. Nia stepped forward. Harrison looked at her in surprise. Nia, he tried to frame you. He insulted you. He deserves this. He does, Nia said firmly. She looked at Derek, who couldn't even meet her eyes. He deserves to lose his job. He deserves to be marched out by security. She paused, thinking of Malik, thinking of the wallet, thinking of the second chance Harrison had given her when she was just a desperate mother with an eviction notice. But Mr. Vance, you taught me that business isn't just about policies. It's about people. And people get lost. I've been lost. If you fire him now, with this guilt hanging over him, he's finished. He'll never recover. She took a deep breath. Don't fire him. Demote him. Strip him of his VP title. Make him start over in the maintenance department. Let him work with the people he looked down on. Let him earn his way back like I did. She looked directly at Derek. Mercy isn't weakness, Derek. It's a door. You can walk through it and try to be the man your mother wanted you to be, or you can stay out in the cold. It's your choice. Harrison looked from Nia to Derek, stunned by the grace of the woman he had hired. He saw the integrity he had sensed in her son shining brightly in her. Slowly, he nodded. He turned to Derek. You heard her, Derek. That is more mercy than you deserve. Do you accept? Derek looked up, his eyes red and swollen, looking at Nia with a mixture of shame and awe. He wiped his face and nodded, his voice barely a whisper. I accept. Thank you. I don't know why you're doing this, but thank you. Spring finally arrived in Chicago, not with a whisper, but with a glorious burst of color that chased away the gray memory of winter. In Millennium Park, the tulip beds were a riot of red and yellow, and the famous cloud gate sculpture, the beam, reflected a skyline that sparkled under a limitless blue sky. It was the day of the annual Vance Energy Company picnic, and the air smelled of charcoal smoke, roasted corn, and the sweet scent of fresh grass. Harrison Vance stood near the pavilion, holding a paper plate and watching his employees. For years, these picnics had been obligations he rushed through, checking his watch and forcing smiles. Today, he didn't want to be anywhere else. He looked toward the grill station. There, wearing a comical apron over a t-shirt, was Derek Thorne. The former vice president was flipping burgers, sweat on his brow, laughing as a maintenance worker joked about his grilling technique. Derek had taken the demotion without complaint. For the past 3 months, he had worked in the basement, learning the boiler systems, fixing leaks, and for the first time in his life, getting his hands dirty. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a quiet humility that made him seem younger, lighter. He caught Harrison's eye across the lawn and offered a genuine, tentative wave. Harrison nodded back, a silent acknowledgement of a second chance well used. "He's doing good, isn't he?" a voice said beside him. Harrison turned to see Nia Johnson, looking radiant in a simple yellow sundress. She held a cup of lemonade, her eyes following his gaze to Derek. "He is," Harrison agreed. "You were right, Nia. Mercy was the right call. He just needed to remember what it felt like to be human again." He smiled at her, a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the sun. "And speaking of humans, look at him." He pointed to the playground. Malik was there, hanging upside down from the monkey bars, shrieking with laughter as he played tag with a group of other kids. He wasn't the lonely, burdened boy carrying the weight of an eviction notice anymore. He was just a child, free and happy. "I have a surprise for you," Nia said suddenly, her voice dropping to a whisper. She checked her watch. "It should be here right now." Harrison followed her gaze to the curb where a yellow taxi had just pulled up. The door opened, and a young woman stepped out. She looked hesitant, clutching her purse, scanning the crowd with anxious eyes. She had Harrison's nose, his chin, and the same way of tilting her head when she was nervous. Harrison's paper plate slipped from his fingers, landing unnoticed on the grass. The breath left his lungs in a rush. "Sarah," he choked out. "I wrote to her," Nia explained softly, stepping back to give him space. "I told her everything. About Malik, about Derek, about how you've changed. I told her that her father wasn't just a CEO anymore. I told her he was a good man who missed her." Harrison didn't hear the rest. He was already moving, his legs carrying him faster than they had in 20 years. "Sarah," he called out, his voice breaking. The young woman turned. When she saw him, her hesitation vanished. She dropped her bag and ran. They met in the middle of the grass, colliding in an embrace that defied the years of silence and distance between them. Harrison held his daughter, burying his face in her shoulder, weeping openly in front of his entire company. He didn't care. He had his fortune in the bank, but now, holding his child, he finally felt rich. Later, as the sun began to set, casting long golden shadows across the park, Harrison found Malik sitting on a bench, tying his shoelace. The boy looked up and grinned, missing a front tooth now. Harrison sat down beside him, looking out at the Chicago skyline, which was starting to twinkle with evening lights. "You know, Malik," Harrison said softly, "my daughter is here today because of you." Malik looked confused, scrunching up his nose. "But I didn't do anything. I just gave you your wallet back." Harrison chuckled, wrapping an arm around the boy's thin shoulders. "You think that's all you did? Son, when you returned that wallet, you saved your mother's job. Because she got that job, she saved my company. Because she showed mercy to Derek, she saved his soul. And because she wrote to Sarah, she saved my family." He looked down at the boy, his eyes shining with gratitude. "You dropped a pebble in a pond, Malik, and the ripples reached all the way across the ocean." Malik thought about this for a moment, then shrugged, picking up a dandelion. "Mama says doing the right thing is its own reward," he said simply. "Your mama is right," Harrison said, looking over at Nia and Sarah talking and laughing by the picnic tables. "But sometimes, if we're very lucky, the reward is a life we never dared to dream of." He took a deep breath of the cool spring air, feeling the peace settle deep in his bones. It had started with a lost wallet and a poor boy's choice, and it had ended here, with love found and a broken world made whole. As the sun sets over the skyline of Chicago, we are reminded that true wealth is never found in a bank account, but in the integrity we keep when no one is watching. Little Malik showed us that a single act of honesty, no matter how small, has the power to shatter the walls of prejudice and ripple outward to heal even the most broken hearts. If this story touched your spirit, we invite you to share it with someone you love, spreading the warmth of kindness just a little further today.